I'm Roniel.
I'm DaRon. In today's episode, we're going to discuss NIST's recommendation for passwords and password management. We'll also talk a little bit about passwordless authentication and the use of biometrics. However, the vast majority of that is going to go into a different episode. Here's one of the big things that people don't understand. When they put out NIST Special Publication 800-63 Bravo or B, what they did was make a series of recommendations and things of that nature that were bogus back then and are even more bogus now. They made no sense at the time, but the worst part was they actually directly conflict with NIST Special Publication 800-53. Now, if you don't know, 53 is the stuff that we have to do in the federal government. It's what we have to adhere to. So if you're under FSMA or anything of that nature, then you know you have to adhere to NIST Special Publication 800-53, even if you're, say, an NSS, National Security System, you still have to adhere to 53. Of course, you have additional guidance that goes on top of that, or if you're in a classified environment. But what you don't actually have to adhere to is NIST Special Publication 800-63, which is the one that we're looking at here. So what everyone, when this came out, there was a lot of buzz about some of the changes that they made. And actually, I want to see if we can't talk about some of those changes and discuss how ignorant, honestly, the authors were. And this is a publication that a lot of people seem to be pointing to in their drive to move to passwordless authentication. And it's wrong. It doesn't make any sense at all. And there's another Microsoft publication, a blog posting actually, that people will point to as well, which will also show that does the same exact thing in so much as it gives people false beliefs and false ideas.
Okay, so just to talk a little bit about this. So why is Special Publication 63? I mean, of course, we know that you said they had no business writing this. Why is the reason why they shouldn't follow this? But why shouldn't the viewers who are actually probably pointing this stuff out and probably referencing this special publication, why shouldn't they follow this again?
A lot of the recommendations that they make in here are actually wrong. So let's jump into a good example, just to kick this off. So we see here, this particular document states that you should, now in the world of government and legal, there's a difference between shall and should and must and may and things of that nature. But they go through and say that you should not require passwords to be changed arbitrarily. And it says, e.g. periodically. And this, of course, is in section 5.1.1.2 of 800-63B. The issue with that, though, is they go on to say, verifiers shall force a change if there is evidence of compromise of the authenticator. In other words, if there's evidence that your password was stolen or the hash happened to have been stolen, then you should change your password. But other than that, you should no longer have to change your passwords every 60 days, 90 days, 180 days, whatever your organization defines. So this document is actually in direct conflict with NIST Special Publication 800-53. And I will point out really quickly, this was written in 2017. NIST Special Publication 800-53, which is one that I did in fact have a hand in actually for 3 revisions. 53 is about 2 decades old at this point, may actually be 2 decades old at this point. But they've had 5 different revisions during the course of that period. The latest revision is revision 5, which came out after 2017. And every single version of NIST Special Publication 800-53 states you have to have this periodic changing of passwords. So you have to have some kind of maximum password age. You also have to have a minimum password age, but you have to have a maximum password age. The reason why they have that is that password age is supposed to be derived based on the sensitivity of the system, the sensitivity of the data, and then what kind of hashing or encryption algorithms and keys, sizes, and all of that other stuff you are using. So the more sensitive the data or the more sensitive the system that password protects, the shorter that time frame should be. The worse the algorithm, the worse the smaller the key size, the fewer iterations, if you're talking a multi-iterative hashing algorithm where you run over that hash and iterate over it, say 1,000 times or however many times you choose to do, depending on what you're using for the digest, that influences that maximum password life, or it's supposed to, because you change it not because you know it has been compromised. Obviously, if it has been, or there's potential that it has been compromised, you should change your password. But you actually change it because you may have had it compromised and you simply don't know.
I agree with that. I think that's what we were following when I was over at IBM and other companies as well. However, why would NIST allow this to come out knowing that this may be wrong? Or did they even know that this was wrong?
Again, I've written actually 6 different NIST special publications and multiple revisions thereof. And in each and every one of them, we weren't allowed to put in any new recommendations. To the point where, as we've mentioned before, I've said I wanted to change the minimum password length to 15 characters.
Okay, yep.
And 15 was a very specific choice. We talked about it a little bit in a previous discussion, but it was based on the fact that at 15 characters, NTLM passwords are the only thing that Windows will store. It will no longer store the landman hash. The landman hash being a weaker algorithm where it splits your password into 2 7-character long passwords and then hashes those 2 independently and then concatenates the hashes together. Whereas you don't have that issue with NTLM. So what that was, and this was for NIST Special Publication 800-118, which never made it. It died because of politics. And we were told we couldn't do that. We weren't allowed to put in any recommendations. I do not know how people didn't catch what went on in 63B or 63 at all, because it wasn't just a few tiny changes. We're talking about a lot of very large changes. For example, verifiers should not impose other composition rules, e.g. requiring mixtures of different character types, but that's actually required under 53. That's also required under DoD, the DISA guidelines, and it's required under NSA guidelines. I haven't seen any security guidance that doesn't say, hey, you need to require at least 3 of the 4. So uppercase, lowercase, some kind of symbol, and then a number. I've never seen someone have such gelded security requirements for passwords. And I actually know where some of this is coming from, and we'll get into it a little bit. But some of this is coming from bogus statements made by Microsoft and by others.
So are you saying that they're basically following whatever articles or publications from Microsoft and then saying, okay, if Microsoft is saying this, which they are the ones that actually wrote the operating system and stuff, then maybe we should implement this into our special publications to let everybody know where we're moving going forward, even though that's not the way things should be done?
It seems like the individuals who wrote this, I believe they were from Deloitte, which says a lot because honestly, yes. So I actually have a relatively negative view of a lot of the people I've worked with at Deloitte from as far as the security professionals are concerned. I haven't had, I'm sure there are great people there. I've had bad luck in that I haven't met those people. And I suspect that played a role in this. Typically, these special publications are actually historically written by Booz Allen and people working for Booz Allen. That's how I managed to get involved with the whole thing. But lately, it's been a little wonky. Some of that is because they keep putting out more and more special publications, and they're trying to put out a ton of them at once. For example, they did the Secure Software Development Lifecycle, which was honestly one of the worst written special publications I've ever seen. And because they're having to create so many, and much of that is actually being driven by presidential executive orders, they are not putting the quality into them that they used to, and they're not selecting experts. They're basically doing a shotgun approach where they go and find 1 million billion people, tell them to write this special publication. These individuals don't know what they're doing, and it's reflected in their writing.
So you're basically hitting nails on things that happen not only in this particular case, but happens in the field as well. So
yes, that's true. That is true. So this is the Microsoft article that kicked off a lot of the firestorm that then appears to have heavily influenced some of this big push for passwordless authentication and claims that passwords don't work. In fact, actually, if you read this, the premise is that passwords don't work, which of course you and I know isn't the case. So I've seen plenty of systems that have been compromised because of bad passwords. And when you actually look at this, while the argument of the author, the stance of the author is that passwords don't work, and you actually look, you see repeatedly that passwords do work, even according to the author, that according to this author, unless someone already knows your password and it's in, say, the list of the top 10 or top 50 known passwords, such as password 123 or admin, then, or password, then it's not going to matter what your password is. You could have it anything you want, and you could leave it that way ad infinitum, so long as your system hasn't been compromised, so long as the password hasn't been compromised.
And if it has, you need to change it immediately.
Right. That's exactly right. But the problem with what they're saying is they don't understand that the reason why we require passwords to be changed with some regularity is because you can be compromised and not know it. Your password, if you reuse it, could have been compromised and you not know it. And if it has been compromised, then someone could actually be leveraging that password right now, and you have no clue.
Because you don't know. You don't know if you've been compromised, and it's best that you do rotate your passwords often, very often.
Yes.
And like you said, depending on what algorithm they're using, that's going to matter heavily, especially if you have sensitive data. Like for the maybe normal user, they probably don't care too much about that. But, a lot of the times you don't have, like, for instance, your email. Nobody's telling you to rotate your email, but in a corporate stance, they should be telling you to rotate and change all of that, at one time simultaneously. But for people who are just day-to-day users, they're not telling you that. They don't probably even know that. But it is great and better that you actually rotate your password. You never know when you're compromised. Nobody's going to tell you, and then boom, maybe a year from later, or hey, you've been compromised since 2 or 3 years ago.
Right. Yes, this whole time you've been compromised, you have been using your email and you didn't know that it was broken into. They've been reading your email constantly and you had no clue. I mean, that's the biggest issue I have is we seem to have people who are writing right now a lot of this stuff and they don't understand the history, and so they're doomed to repeat it. They don't understand we have these things because we know most compromises aren't detected within the first 24 hours. Most compromises aren't detected within the first month. Usually a compromise is only detected when an attacker starts to get antsy and starts blowing things up.
Yep. Those are your script kiddies. They do that a lot. I'm not saying that professional black hats don't do that as well, but majority of I want to say 90% or more are script kiddies going at your system, and they don't care. They just want to get as much data as they can. So eventually they'll probably slip up and do something, and then that's when you find out. And that could be shoot. I've seen people who didn't know they were compromised for a year or so.
Yes,
More.
SolarWinds was a long time before they found out that they had been compromised, and that's actually really common. Sony, you could go company after company.
It's crazy. Yeah, I agree.
See, and the real kicker to me is, despite when you actually look at that table that we have up above, and we look at the arguments that this author is making, where they're saying over and over again, your password won't matter at the end of the day unless it happens to be, as it says here, within the top 10, within the top 50, your password isn't going to matter. Okay, so if that's the case, according to this author, your password is secure almost no matter what. If your password is secure almost no matter what, then why does the author go through and say your password doesn't matter, but multi-factor authentication does? Based on our studies, your account is more than 99% less likely to be compromised if you use multi-factor authentication. The issue is this author is arguing that your password doesn't matter because passwords are terrible and they don't work. Passwords are useless, while at the same time showing all this research from themselves that shows that even a bad password is highly unlikely to get compromised. But that's according to them. But that's not the experience that I would argue most people actually have. I think most people would tell you, when their organization gets compromised and their passwords get stolen, attackers go off and they use all of those passwords, and then they try, number one, they add it to their little databases. But I've seen where I got hit over the course of 3 days by someone trying to brute force SSH. And that's actually not uncommon from what I've seen. People will grind on your system for a long time, but Microsoft is looking at it only from a Microsoft Azure perspective. And so when you get these folks writing for NIST and they're taking data from a very, very specific group, that Microsoft Azure, the only compromises they are monitoring are compromises of Azure Active Directory and Office 365. They're not looking at compromises of people's virtual machines because they don't have purview into that.
I mean, yeah, you're right, because I've seen it even when I'm managing servers, SSH servers, different servers. They would just grind and try. And to me, I look at everything as a layer of protection, because they're using lists to brute force things. They're not going to be able to just go in and crack your password. It's going to take them a long, long time to try to do that. And unless they have it in their list, unless it got compromised through some breach, more than likely they're not going to compromise your system. And that's what I see. And then also you see people that use password to for every account. So once they do get your password or you've been breached, then they can get into all of your accounts, which is good to rotate your password on all your systems.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. If I compromise the one, usually what I will do is figure out, okay, well, what data do I have? What access do I have? Whose account is this? And then the first thing that most attackers do is they try to see if there are any other accounts tied to you that they can find anywhere. So if I compromise even something like Facebook or some kind of social media, well, I may go then and try to see if I can use those same credentials to get more data on your corporate systems. And that's why we have the recommendations that we do have. I don't understand, though. There's been this huge attack. Like this one gentleman kept saying, oh, passwords are so insecure. Passwords are insecure. Biometrics are better.
What?
Yes. Yes. He said he actually was pushing companies off passwords and getting them to go pure biometrics.
No.
Yes.
No. Like, you know how easy it is to compromise biometrics? Like, that is not hard to do.
Yes.
Especially the way they do things. We're not that advanced yet, especially I don't know how it is in the government, but even in the civilian world, we're not that advanced. Like, it's easy for me to get into my iPhone, even though they have their little so-called biometrics. It's not that great. And again, it goes back to my thought of having that layer of protection. I feel more safer having a password and then adding some layers on top of layers than not having a password at all. And then it's like you're going straight to that middle man. You have this monkey in the middle, and then you have these two people throwing things. But I went past all other stuff and went straight to the monkey, the person in the middle. I mean, maybe that's not the best analogy, but what I'm saying is it's like you're skipping things. You're skipping the fundamental process, like the foundation of what keeps it secure. And to say they're not secure, what evidence do they have to say that? And as you said, that writer, from looking, he's proven that they are secure.
Right. Yes. His own statistics claim that passwords are in fact secure, but at the same time he's saying, oh, everyone should do multi-factor because you have 99% fewer compromises. I'm like, but you've already said that you don't get compromised with passwords. Make up your mind. Do you think passwords are bad, or do you think passwords are good?
But they don't have, to me, it seems like they don't have the fundamental knowledge. Like they don't understand this. They don't understand what was implemented.
No.
So, because everybody will tell me that, oh, well, why can't I just use multi-factor? Because you're too lazy to remember your passwords when you have password managers.
Right.
We got to stop being lazy.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense because it's easy to compromise multi-step, multi-factor without having passwords. I guarantee you. And a lot of people are getting phished. If you come on.
Okay, Uber's the perfect example of that. See, here's the thing: is everyone's but they had to sit there and they had to swipe accept or whatever. Okay, well, the attacker's hitting them over and over and over again with these requests. The person's going to A, slip up, B, maybe they were actually at the same time trying to get into something that requires them to swipe up on whatever tool they happen to be using and accept that. There's so many things that come with all of this that it isn't the solution. It's not the panacea. But the other component that everyone is forgetting is it's actually cheaper and easier to manage and maintain passwords. The initial setup cost is less. The overall management is less than it is to go through and do something like multi-factor authentication, or even if you're talking single-factor authentication. Hard tokens are expensive, and now I have to manage those. Heaven help you if you forget it or lose it. Plus, hard tokens are still actually a what you know. This is the thing I never understood. So for those of you who don't know, the breakout is you have what you have, and that would be something like a smart card or a hard token. Even soft tokens are kind of sort of there. What you know, that'd be something like a password, or when you get those emails, the multi-step, so they ask you to provide them a code that they send through text message or email or what have you. That's also a what you know, not a what you have, which is a little odd if you think about it. And then the other is what you are. So that's your biometrics. That's things like fingerprints, retinal scan, face scan, voice analysis, things of that nature. Each one of those factors, the way you look at it when you look at that non-practical implementation is each factor is equal to the other. They're just as secure. So what you know is just as secure as what you have is just as secure as what you are, which would mean biometrics is just as secure as passwords, is just as secure as something like a smart card. The truth is there's a difference between theory and implementation in this case. And to exactly what you're talking about, you have two ways that you can go with biometrics. Either one, you can accept that you're going to have a lot of false positives, or two, you're going to accept that you have a lot of false negatives. False negatives, of course, being where the biometrics authenticates you even though it's not really that individual. False positives is where it is the individual and they won't let you in anyway. The way this works is the sensitivity. So as you increase the sensitivity of your biometrics, you actually decrease the likelihood of a false positive, but you increase the likelihood of a false negative, of someone being denied access to something that they legitimately should have access to. Most commercial products out there for biometrics are terrible, and they're extremely lax because it's very inconvenient to users to be denied access to something legitimate, because the retinal scan didn't work, because the fingerprint didn't work. Maybe I did some manual labor or something like that earlier in the day, so my fingerprint is screwed up. Maybe I'm an older individual. It's very hard to get a fingerprint from an older individual. Maybe I got into a car accident. That's a separate issue altogether. And maybe I lost the finger or fingers that were registered in the biometrics. Maybe I got pregnant, because you can actually tell with the retinal scan that someone is pregnant before any pregnancy test out there can actually detect it. Maybe I have cataracts that are forming. Maybe I have glaucoma. Maybe I have diabetes. So many things come in that really mess up biometrics. And so to try to accommodate that in the commercial world, they make it much more lenient, much less sensitive. What I found interesting, though, is while there was that one gentleman who was pushing biometrics, and I mentioned many of the negative sides to that and pointed out that it really makes no sense. I pointed out things like age affects it. So your voice changes as you grow older. Your fingerprints actually change as you get older, and they're harder to take. Your retinal scan changes as you get older. So you have to constantly update all of these things. If you go on vacation and come back, that can mess up your biometrics depending on what they're doing. But it gets even worse than that, because biometrics themselves, and the one thing I will give them this is in NIST Special Publication 800-63 Bravo, they do go through and they talk about the downsides of biometrics to the point where they actually say they only support limited use of biometrics for authentication. And they list out the reasons for that. I found that interesting because the same guy who was pointing to 63 Bravo for, oh, we shouldn't have to do password rotation anymore, was the same person who was pushing biometrics, even though that document explicitly does the exact opposite and says biometrics are a terrible method for if all you're doing is single factor authentication, especially because most systems don't support biometric authentication.
So do you think that people that are pushing for these things don't really understand what the people who are presenting these things really mean? And does the person who's actually presenting them, are they actually projecting that? Are they actually stating that? Are they really pushing forward to state that here's what we think, but here's what you should do? Like, because I think a lot of people are misreading. Maybe they're using their own narrative of what they think things should be, but really don't understand what the author or the person who wrote this really meant. And sometimes the people who are writing these things, they don't even know what they mean. So, like, how do they get better at, like, I mean, I'm talking about just the author actually presenting this information, or do you think they actually are just doing the right thing or saying the right things, in particular maybe the biometrics, and then people just are taking their own narrative and running with it and just to push whatever their beliefs are?
It's a good question. I think a lot of people cherry pick when it comes to what guidance to follow, and within that guidance, what to follow. And that's what we're really seeing here is the individual cherry picked. He saw that 63 Bravo said, hey, password rotation should go away. Password complexity should go away by and large. And he ignored that it also said biometrics are not the answer.
Yeah, so they're not really reading. Maybe they're skimming and not really reading what is being said. So that would piss me off if somebody took what I said and just kind of just went on and do whatever they want with it and don't understand. It's probably piss you off when you're in a meeting with compliance people and they don't understand what the hell they're talking about, what it meant coming from the NIST special publication.
Yes.
And you knew because you wrote it.
Yes, that actually is, it's incredibly irksome when you have someone who's making these claims. Oh, it says this, and this, or this control means XYZ. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. I don't know what you were smoking or drinking when you came up with that interpretation. But you're wrong.
And so, but still, like, even, okay, so if compliance people are misinterpreting and people are cherry picking what they want, how, as an author who's writing these special publications, how do we get better at guiding them, not, what you really mean and not to misinterpret and be deceptive by it?
I think a large part of the issue is there are so many recommendations put out. I mean, NIST has hundreds of special publications, and that's just the special publications, yes. And there are more than just those. They have lots of other papers and works that you're supposed to adhere to as well. It's crazy how much is out there. And that's why I always say, look, I don't care about NIST special publication 800-30 or 37 or 217 or 215, or those don't matter to me. Those are all silly. All they are at best is supplemental or maybe even just further explanation of 53. That's what they're supposed to be. Oftentimes they fail in that regard, but that's why I tell people don't get confused by all of the others. Just focus on 800-53. Come to understand that, and once you understand that, then you can look at 800-60, 61, 115, 117, and so on and so forth. So you can spiral out and read that documentation. And the other thing I tell people is you also need to avoid looking at interpretations from the commercial world because they oftentimes get it wrong, and avoid using external resources such as, say, OWASP or something like that as the basis of your understanding, because as we've discussed, OWASP is really bad. Number one, most of what they say is actually wrong, but number two, when they try to interpret other recommendations, other documentation, they tend to do it wrong. So it's better to look at that NIST documentation, look at it by itself, and then maybe you can pull in MITRE, or maybe you can look at some of the disastigs if you have other questions or thoughts or comments, or you want additional clarification. And then you can kind of move out from there, but don't start at just an arbitrary special publication, read that and think, oh, this is it, because they don't matter. The only one that matters is 53. And then, of course, any of the FIPS, all the FIPS stuff is a requirement too. So FIPS 199, 201, 200, that kind of thing. Those are all requirements.
Yeah, that's a good thing. We should definitely link that down in the can follow, because when I looked at it, there were so many publications that I'm like, which one do I follow? Until you told me 53 was the one I should be focusing on. and I'm like trying to get through that and make sure I understand what their requirements are. So, and then there's so much stuff out there. And then looking at OWASP compared to NIST, it makes like NIST makes OWASP look like a joke, which is why I don't understand why people don't understand. Like, to get away from the OWASP thing unless they're going to fix their stuff.
Right.
And, go to NIST and MITRE, which are a lot better. They understand what things are, they understand what they're doing, and it makes sense. But again, the people that are looking at this stuff, stop misinterpreting this shit. Read it thoroughly. Understand what you're reading before you go and you publish or you put out some article. Does not make sense. And then people are following those things, and they're following your misinterpretation, and then they're being deceived by what they think things should be. And then you have people arguing about it, especially in their work area, or what they think things should be, and they're arguing, complaining because these are not right. The information they got is not right. It's like looking at Wikipedia.
Right.
When you look at it's just like looking at Wikipedia.
Yes.
Anybody can write and type things in there. That doesn't mean it's actually right.
Yes. Yes. That's actually spot on. OWASP is Wikipedia. It's the Wikipedia of security.
Yep.
Just look at all the dead projects.
Oh man, that going back trying to look at what the methodology statements were for different things is so out of date. And then even some of their new top 10 are so ridiculous. Like they don't align with none of the stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't even follow them. You know what I'm saying? But that's the standard, as you see, with most of these consulting places, that OWASP is what everybody follows.
Yeah.
I think we should not follow them. I think we should, as we said in other episode, that we should start following the more reputable people like MITRE and NIST and stuff like that. That's our time. If you like this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. We will leave the special publication that you should focus on down at the bottom of, I believe, in our description page. But if you like it, please like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know what you thought about this episode, and we'll see you in another one. I'm Roniel.
I'm DaRon.
Later.
Have fun.